Great. It looks like we already have some participants. So thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Katie and I'm Program Director at the French American Foundation. Our subject today is Building a Brighter New York City, and we're going to hear about building effective bridges between global industries and government in New York. We're delighted to have with us today Kathryn Wylde, President and CEO for Partnership of New York City. We're also delighted to welcome as moderator Remy Raisner, founder and CEO of the Raisner Group. So I'll first briefly introduce Remy. So as founder and CEO of the Raisner Group, which is formerly Proteus Capital Management, Remy is in charge of running the private real estate investment firm headquartered in New York City. And under his leadership, the Raisner Group has raised capital domestically and internationally since 2009. Remy has a background as an equity trader in New York and also worked for a real estate investment firm in Argentina, where he focused on Latin American acquisitions. He's been a contributor on real estate, business, and foreign affairs topics for publications like the Huffington Post, Forbes, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Observer, and Le Monde. He is an original member of the French American Foundation's Transatlantic Forum. And interestingly, prior to his career in business, he played professional basketball. So Remy, I will hand it over to you to introduce Kathryn and to begin the conversation. Thank you both for being with us.
Hey, thank you very much. Thank you, Kathryn, for joining us today, and thanks to the French American Foundation for organizing. I will briefly present Kathryn and her background. She's got a very impressive background, and then hand off the microphone to her. Kathryn is the president and CEO of the nonprofit Partnership for New York City, which is the city's leading business organization. The mission of the Partnership for New York City is to work with government, labor, and the civic sector to build a stronger New York with a focus on education, infrastructure, and the economy. Prior to taking over the presidency and the management of the partnership in 2001, she was the founder and CEO of the partnership's housing and investment fund affiliates, with a strong background since 1982 in developing and managing affordable housing and in economic development programs. She's an internationally known expert on housing, economic development, and urban policy. She received a honorary degree from Fordham University and St. Francis College. She sits on a number of boards and advisory groups, including the NYC Economic Development Corporation, the Manhattan Institute. Before joining the partnership, Kathryn had senior positions with a bank, Anchor Savings Bank, and at the Lutheran Medical Center in Sunset Park in Brooklyn. She's a native of Wisconsin, and in 2018, City and State magazine considered her to be the third most important person in New York City and State, after Michael Bloomberg and Stephen Ross. And Crain's New York Business listed her among the 50 most powerful women in New York City in 2017. Kathryn, thank you very much for being with us today and for taking the time. I will hand over the microphone to you, and we appreciate you being here. I look forward to your speech.
Thank you, Remy, and nice to be with you. I know of the French American Foundation for many years. I came to work for David Rockefeller at the partnership in 1982. The then chairman of the French American Foundation was a guy named Ed Tuck, who was an attorney with Sherman Sterling. And I visited with him a lot about the work. So congratulations on your mission and efforts as well. I think all of us around the world, especially in the world's great cities, are trying to figure out a path to recovery and a path for what we're going to do post-COVID. We think a lot about that at the partnership, but for the last almost 11 months, it's hard to imagine, we have been focused on getting through the health and economic crises that are facing New York City and state, and obviously the global crises that are affecting business. In New York, the good news is that our major sectors in financial services, media, technology, professional services managed to move immediately and seamlessly to remote work and have kept our economy going. Early projections were concerns that New York's economic output would fall substantially. In fact, from a high of $1 trillion a year in 2019, we think that the most the economy for 2020 is going to be down is probably 1 to 5%, which is less than about half what was originally projected. And that is, again, thanks to the fact that remote work has worked for our major industries, which have kept their employees employed. On the other hand, New York was the first American city to be hit by the COVID, and we've been hit harder than any place else in the country. And that has taken a toll, particularly on certain sectors of the economy. Obviously, travel and tourism is a big one. We usually get 55, 60 million visitors a year, many of them international, and the loss of that the brick and mortar economy, small business, retail, neighborhood shopping services have been very badly hit. And then, of course, the secondary impact has been on real estate and the real estate sector, which has seen perhaps 20% loss of value in the commercial area. So those are areas of damage. We've lost a net of over 500,000, 500,000 jobs, again, concentrated among relatively low-wage jobs in the small business sector is where the heaviest loss of jobs has occurred. That has losing 500,000 jobs. That's as many as we had created over the last decade of growth and prosperity in the city. So that's a severe challenge. As an example of what it's costing the state, we spent over $60 billion in unemployment insurance. New York State did unemployment claims in the last 11 months. That's more than we spent for the previous 30 years. So it's a big number. So again, the economic impact is not as bad as we feared, but it's very concentrated. And it's concentrated on those most vulnerable businesses and those most vulnerable workers and families. So that's been very tough on New York City and has exacerbated some of the political divisions in the city, as they've seen that people could work comfortably from the Hamptons throughout the pandemic. And yet in the communities of the city, people were standing in food lines that had never thought that would be where they ended up. So on the health side, we obviously also have suffered more in the way of deaths and cases than any other place in the country. And that has been, we have the great fortune of having an amazing healthcare delivery system, great healthcare institutions, but we didn't have as much on the community level in preventive health as we should have had. One of the lessons of the pandemic is to pay attention to the people in public health who have told us for years that 80% of the cause of disease are the social determinants of health, not germs, but rather whether you have the right diet, whether you are in a polluted environment, whether you have a decent economic situation, good housing. So all those factors have come into play in this concentration of both health and economic impacts on our Black and brown and low income communities. So that's been, that does not help what was already a divided political situation in the city, where and that's a concern going forward, because getting out of the crisis, moving forward, and dealing with the issues we face is going to require unifying the city and the state around a consensus of what we need to do to recover, how to come back. And that's very much not an agreed upon agenda at this point. It's wide open. One of the things we learned after 9/11 in looking at how the communities rebound from a crisis And the key historic factor is the faster you unify the community around a plan and follow it to recover, the more likely is your recovery. We have not done that. The state and the city have been focused on managing the health side of the crisis, and I will say that New York State and city have done better than any place else in really managing the spread. After the first 3 months, we have done well on that front. I think that we can be confident that we will do well on the vaccine front as soon as the federal issues are straightened out and the supply of vaccine is adequate to meet needs. I think we will get it distributed in a fair, equitable, and efficient manner, but that's still in front of us. Until we have the vaccine, our economy is going to remain frustrated, as frankly, right now, there are fewer than 15% of the city's 1.2 million office workers are back in the office. They're waiting for health issues to be resolved, for confidence in that the transit system will be safe, and for understanding of what's going to happen with our schools, and that the kids will be back in school and not in remote learning. So all those are factors that are all impacting the pace of our economic recovery. So we are, so our dependence on the vaccine is very important. We're very proud that 2 of our partnership members, New York City-based Pfizer and New Jersey-based Johnson & Johnson, are both at the front end of the war on the COVID with producing vaccines in what only can be described as a miracle short period of time. So that's, hopefully we're going to be in good shape on that front soon. I had my first shot a few weeks ago. I'm having my second on Tuesday. So it's great for your mental health, I'll tell you that. I feel much better and more confident to navigate. And I hope that's going to be true in general of the city. This week, the governor has announced the reopening of indoor dining. It's still on a 25% of occupancy basis. So it's not an economic deal for any restaurant. This month is an extension of restaurant to go delivery of meals from restaurants that are participating in the program, and any support anyone can give to them, I know will be appreciated. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had 27,000 restaurants in the city. We probably have lost 5,000 of them already, and many more are threatened. Many have not paid rent in the past few months, some for the past 10 months. And when the eviction moratorium is over on May 1st, many others will face the decision of whether they can come up with the rent or have to close down. So any support we can give, and they're an example of the whole neighborhood economy, local small business sector that's really suffering. I think we're optimistic. More than optimistic, we're confident in the long-term prospects for New York City to rebound, but it is not going to be simple, and the economic consequences of the COVID are still rolling out, as I say, in certain sectors of the economy. A combination of one of the things we're working on that we hope will accelerate besides the vaccines is having some kind of a health pass system. We're working with Clear, which is a company that provides the TSA biometric passes. For the last 8 years, they've worked with the federal government, with the TSA and health agencies to be able to get you expedited onto airplanes. And now we're trying to see how we can work with them, and they've developed a health pass that hopefully will get our public venues, our theaters, and our offices, et cetera, open much more quickly. So there's lots going on that's new, that's exciting. It's a lot of work, but we're hopeful that that New York City will be back and have our herd immunity. Hopefully by next September is when we're projecting that we'll be at full throttle. And in the meantime, both the governor and the mayor are trying to speed that up with rapid testing and other programs that will allow for opening up facilities sooner. I don't know if some of you saw that they announced yesterday the opening of Barclays Center in Brooklyn for I guess it's a basketball game. I don't follow the sports.
I can confirm that.
What is it? I'm sorry.
From my background, I can confirm this.
Okay. Anyhow, but they're only going to be at 10% occupancy. And that is not an economic plan for any business to be at 10% occupancy. So, so we need to keep pushing to get everybody vaccinated as soon as the supply becomes available, which Pfizer has assured us it will be within the very near term. That supplies as soon as Johnson & Johnson comes online, that we should be good on that front. So, Remy, is that good enough for an opening statement?
This is fantastic. Thank you so much, Kathryn. Very much appreciated. I echo your sentiment about what there is to rebuild in New York and being confident about the city. Hope to be quite involved and look to people like you to provide terrific guidance as you had. So, Kathryn, if that's good with you, we'll open to Q&A now.
Absolutely.
Perfect. And I'm going to ask the first two questions. So looking forward, let's say we're in 2031. 10 years from now, what does New York City look like, and what will have happened between 2021 and 2031, in your opinion? Big picture.
Well, we may look a lot more. I'm getting feedback. We may look a lot more like Paris. As we have, as you know, I think adopted now a new framework of more streets that are available to pedestrians, fewer cars, more cafes, outside retail shopping, outside markets has been, were put in place. And to the extent the weather allows, I think there's a lot of appetite to continue that approach, fewer cars, more pedestrians, more bicycles. And I think that's all a very positive thing. On the other hand, that will certainly have an impact on the support for the mass transit system. We're no longer going to necessarily have a hub and spokes economy where everybody's coming into Manhattan to work and going home at night. I think that, as happened in New York after 9/11, today, 1/3 of the people that work in lower Manhattan walk to work because of the residential development here. After 9/11, we really, before 9/11, for those of you who weren't here, you could walk around lower Manhattan at 6 o'clock at night and there'd be no one here. So it was not a residential community. But since then, it's become a strong mixed-use community, which has been actually a terrific thing. And I think that's going to happen in neighborhoods throughout the city, and that our transportation system is going to have to be redesigned around local point-to-point. It's possible that kids will be going to school in their neighborhood, taking classes remotely that are taught all over the city, but not getting on a subway or a bus to go to school, which would, I think most parents would like, would be a convenience, but it's going to be different, require a change. Clearly, our healthcare system at the community level is going to have to be much more accessible to our low-income communities, and that's going to be an effort to decentralize the healthcare system and have much better communication between and among our healthcare institutions, public and private. Finally, I think that the high growth industry, as it has been in New York City for the last 5 years, but it's still only less than 10% of our economy, the high growth industry will be technology. And that's going to present a huge challenge for retraining our workforce for the technological world, particularly those who have not been so prepared. So there's going to be a lot of focus in the next few years on apprenticeships, on skills training, on credentialing, not necessarily going for a 4-year bachelor's degree, but helping people learn how to do very, very immediate technical tasks that need to get done, and retraining that workforce. So that would my projection would be that if we get it right, that within 10 years we'll have a more walkable, more breathable community, but that we will have a strong and growing economy. Mute, unmute.
It will be Paris, but the building's a little bit taller, right?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you so much. My second question would be, in your opinion, it's been a year, if we look at the past year in DC, the changes have been so big that they're even hard to understand all of their implications. But what do you think the consequences of what has gone on at the federal level between Trump, a New Yorker, being out of office, the Biden election, not Chuck Schumer being the Senate Majority Leader? What do you think these changes, how do you think they will impact New York City, the state of New York as a whole, but mostly New York City, given the set of cards, so to speak?
Well, I think President Trump was a New Yorker. He's now a Floridian. And I think that reflects the fact that he became uncomfortable with the politics of New York. We're a blue city, meaning Democratic. We are a sanctuary city, meaning we have a humanitarian approach toward immigrants, documented or not. Those got us in trouble with the Trump populist approach on those issues. So we had a tough time under President Trump. Perhaps the worst thing that happened was in the 2017 tax reform bill. Some of the corporate tax reductions, which were very helpful to make business in the US more competitive internationally. Some of those were paid for with the loss of what we call SALT, which is for the last 100 years prior to 2017 tax law change. You were able to deduct your state and local taxes from your federal income tax obligation. That is no longer true since 2017, and it's cost New Yorkers somewhere around $15 billion a year in additional tax payments to the federal government. It's essentially double taxation. So what we're hoping and what we're seeing under the Biden administration and under the majority leadership of Senator Schumer, who's along with myself and a fellow Brooklynite and is very committed to New York. We're already seeing a big difference in terms of actions to support the city. The American Rescue Package that President Biden has released, which is the next stimulus bill, $1.9 trillion stimulus bill, is going to include $350 billion in aid to cities and states, something that had not been done under the previous administration. So that'll be a help to the fiscal challenges, the lost tax revenue and the extra expenses that the city and state have had as a result of the COVID. That'll help us a lot. Hopefully it will help avoid big tax increases here. That's one good thing. Number two, immigration policy is going to change. So whether it's H-1B visas or student visas or family unification, we're going to see, or most importantly, a path to citizenship for undocumented residents. We're going to see a big change in immigration policy, and that's very important to New York. Historically, our population growth comes from foreign immigration. And then people spread out to the rest of the country. But New York depends on immigration. Half our small business entrepreneurs are immigrants, first generation immigrants. So we really need to make sure that immigration is the lifeblood of our city. So that's going to be another important piece. And I think the commitment to mass transit, that there's another $4 billion for the MTA in the package that's going forward. And it's very important. That's another very important piece to reduce our dependence on cars and to support our local mobility.
Okay, thank you very much. Just for the anecdote, I actually participated in a Zoom call last week on which Chuck Schumer was giving an address about New York City specifically. So he really seems to be willing to fight for New York. He can really get you excited about the bounce back. So that's that would be great. I will open the question. I will open the Q&A to the audience now. The first question will be about the mayoral race. Do you, Kathryn, have any particular thought about the New York City mayoral race? Are you excited about any particular candidate, and what leadership qualities do you think would be vital for New York City's next leader?
Thanks. I am preoccupied with the mayoral race, I would say. It's very leadership. We've learned during the COVID how important leadership is. We've learned how important that we have a leader that wants to bring our city together and unite us, not conduct class warfare. So I think, yes, we are very concerned about the mayoral race and hope everyone who can will register and vote in the primaries. We have closed primaries, so if you want to vote, you need to register in the next, probably in the next 24 hours. You need to affiliate with a party if you're already registered to vote. Otherwise, you have till May 28th to register. But if you're not registered, but if you are registered, you only have, there are 1 million New Yorkers who are registered to vote but don't declare a party. They can't participate in our primaries because they're closed. So that's just a tip. You should go online to the Department of Motor Vehicles and declare a party if you haven't done that. In terms of favorites, we do not endorse at the partnership. We have to work with whoever wins. I would say that we're looking for somebody who understands the complexity of the city, again, wants to unite New Yorkers, and who is responsive to the needs of all elements of the city, including the business community, but not to the exclusion of our other areas. So I think experience in government, and importantly, willingness to listen. We've had a lot of pontificating politicians in recent years who have a lot to say, but I think it's important to, at this moment, in terms of our recovery from the COVID, they be prepared to listen, because the sectors and communities of the city have spent the last 10 months working together to try and figure out how to solve their problems. I've been working with, for example, dance studios and some of the human services nonprofit organizations and the restaurant groups. And everybody has really gotten together and taken seriously what do they have to do going forward to provide a healthy and safe environment. And I think it's important that the next mayor hear the expertise from those sectors, from our local communities, from the small business community, and develop policies that are responsive to them.
Thanks a lot. Very good point on voting. You know, it was already important at the federal level, but I believe, if I'm correct, something like only 14% of New Yorkers voted for the last mayoral election. So it's extremely, it's an extremely low turnout in New York City. It's a particular.
Yes, well under 20%. Very important to get people to vote in local elections, or you get the government you deserve if you don't vote.
Terrific. So the next question will be, continuing on the theme of 2031, what is likely to happen to Manhattan real estate, to the Manhattan real estate market, given the concept of the concept of remote work has been proven, both for the commercial and the residential side of the issue?
Well, I think that there's been a clearly the commercial market in Manhattan has been very hot for the past decade, and this has put more than a little chill on it. And I think that will end up long term being okay, because I think that there will be an adjustment, that rents will come down a bit, but that will have given opportunity for a broader variety of companies, especially young companies, to grow here. So I think that's ultimately going to have economic benefits, that a lot of companies that were priced out of the market will be able to come back, or will be able to get in and be able to afford to be here. I don't think there's going to be long-term a fall off in demand for commercial real estate in Manhattan, but I think it will change. It will take a while to come back. And I do think that there's going to be much more demand for disaggregated, decentralized workspace around the city in communities, so people that have gotten used to staying home, working from home, being able to check on their kids, that they'll be able to not work in their home or their apartment, but have offices that are near enough to walk or ride a bike to. So I think that's going to change. I think there's going to be less concentration of our commercial activity in Manhattan.
Again, here I echo your sentiment, and just for the anecdote, in our portfolio, we've seen rents drop maybe 20-30% depending on which units. But what happens now is that some parts of Brooklyn where we are, you can have 3-bedroom apartments for maybe $2,200. It's beginning to be the price level of very tertiary markets in America. So now that word is starting to be out, actually there was an article on Bloomberg a couple of weeks ago, I think 2 weeks ago, about how New York got cheap, and that I think is going to help the city and the real estate market quite a lot. So I share your sentiment.
And also, I think importantly, there's been this anti-development sentiment that has grown up, fear of gentrification, as people have been priced out and small business has been priced out. And so I think long term for the real estate industry, this is going to kind of help balance the fears people had of displacement and the whole anti-development, anti-growth sentiment. I think this is going to reverse some of that people will gradually begin to see that hopefully that they can afford to be in the city and that there's room for growth without displacement.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, the next question would be the high number of wealthy New Yorkers who left the city. It's about the high number of wealthy New Yorkers who left the city and how this is going to impact the tax base of the city and its ability to provide social services going forward. Do you think, Kathryn, that real estate will remain strong in NYC in the next couple of years? And what can the city do to re-attract its wealthy citizens that have departed?
Well, to answer the last part first, in terms of attracting back and retaining its wealthiest citizens, many of whom have been here throughout the COVID, I will say. Not everybody is in the Hamptons or Florida or on a boat somewhere. But the way to do that is to not demonize wealth, but to say this is a resource that we want to support in the city. The politics of the past few years have made it very uncomfortable for some of our city's biggest philanthropists, our biggest job creators, for the Wall Street sector. It's not been, the political environment has been pretty hostile to them, and to the extent that we see the legislature passing a stock transfer tax or a wealth tax on billionaires or a pied-à-terre tax on those that want to buy high-end apartments. People are not going to sign up for that. That's going to keep people from coming back. It's going to keep those who have stayed here. It's going to make them think about relocating to, not just because of taxes, but because punitive taxes are a reflection of a political climate that's hostile to business, that's hostile toward wealth. And we really can't afford that in this city because we're a city that needs a broad tax base. And right now, 1%, the top 1% of earners pay 42% of our taxes. So we have we're dependent on a very relatively small number of New York State taxpayers to carry us forward. I think the number of the top 5% pay 80% of the taxes, and the bottom 50% of earners don't pay any of the taxes. So we're very dependent on high earners, and we can't afford to scare them away.
Thank you very much. Now we have a question on the partnership for New York City itself. How does it approach its work? Mostly, what are its strategies and tactics? And the question is about also how is the partnership for New York City contributing to changing the current political environment? For instance, bending together major business leaders under an environment of a pandemic and perhaps class warfare, or how is it addressing the political polarization that we've had in the city? Yeah.
What an easy question. We have always, since David Rockefeller founded the partnership at the end of the 70s, 1980, the idea has been that we are not a trade association. We are business working in the interests of the city, that we want to partner with government. We want to be a resource to government, not an adversary, and work collaboratively with other elements of the community, with our nonprofit institutions. And so what we try and do, and we're focused on support for public policies that support the economy, infrastructure, and education are the three areas of focus. And we are a membership organization of CEO business leaders in all sectors of the economy. So we try and use the resources of our institutions. Our members employ 1.5 million New Yorkers. So they represent a large part of the professional workforce in the city. Many of them are global companies, and the partnership is a way that they stay engaged and informed on what's happening within New York City and its communities. And those are kind of both the main focus areas and how we conduct our business. We rely on the expertise of our members. We try and reflect that in our policy work, which goes on at the city level, state, and federal. Again, representing the interests of New York City as a whole.
Okay, very good, thank you. We have another question related to urbanism and the points you made before, specifically maybe about a little bit about neighborhood life, which I confirm has formed a lot. I live in downtown Manhattan, and just for lack of human interactions, people have started forming their own neighborhood groups and getting social with each other. It's a very different neighborhood life than pre-COVID. What is your prediction, if any, on the retail industry in New York City? Specifically, as many stores have closed during the pandemic, and most of them have transitioned into online businesses.
It's going to be tough on the brick and mortar retail sector, but I've been inspired to see that there have been a lot of particularly luxury stores reopening. And I think that, and we're working with the city and on a small business resource center project where we're trying to bring a lot of the stores, particularly the minority-owned businesses across the neighborhoods of the city. We're trying to bring them online and help them develop a tech presence, an online presence, and put in the technology they need to restart and keep going. So we're concerned about the number of small business losses we've already had and what we're going to see. But I think that there's a real focus on supporting those that can stay open, that can survive. And I think that that's going to be very important to the communities. Obviously, the local commercial districts, the ethnic nature of so many of our local commercial districts is very special. And the historic nature of so many of our districts. And I think it's in every New Yorker wants to see those neighborhood shopping districts thrive for the sake of the whole city and for their own purposes. It's what makes New York City such an exciting place to live and work. So I think that's going to be, that already is an organic grassroots effort, as you mentioned, to support local business. We've seen that throughout the COVID, and I think that's going to continue.
Terrific. I know you're a Brooklynite, and we ourselves very involved in Brooklyn. So I want to make a point that it's a different picture than Manhattan. You know, Manhattan is not just the whole city, and we're actually leasing stores right now. And you know, you have some of that neighborhood life that you mentioned happening. You know, we're very much involved in Bushwick, for example. We're leasing to fashion stores. We're seeing some cafes that are actually doing better than pre-COVID just because of takeaway business. So it's a different picture over there. Manhattan is what it is, but the boroughs are a little bit different. Another question regarding something that's been very written about the Amazon move into Queens that failed. Do you think that other projects like Amazon HQ2 and Hudson Yard extension may still happen in a post-pandemic world? And then there's a point on the mayor which you more or less addressed already. So do you think projects like Amazon moving in or the extension of Hudson Yard could still be possible going forward?
I had hoped, honestly, that post-Trump, who kind of fueled the anti-corporate, anti-business, anti-Amazon sentiment, that the politics and the political opposition to job creating activity and growth would calm down. So far, that has not been the case. So I think this is going to take real work. I think this is one of the things I'll go back to on the mayoral race. I think we need mayoral leadership to figure out how we support projects like Amazon, like Industry City, these development projects, figure out how we support them, how we convince communities these are not a threat. I'll tell you one example that I think of in the 80s when we started the partnership. I went to work for the partnership to build affordable housing and rebuild the neighborhoods that had burned down in the 70s. And David Rockefeller was very committed to bringing a middle class back to the city. We lost 1 million middle class, mostly middle class residents in the 1970s. And he was very committed to bringing them back. And he thought building homes that they could own, and like 2 and 3 family homes with rental apartments was the way to do that. It turned out to be very much the case. We started in 1982. We developed over 35,000 homes in neighborhoods literally on burned out city-owned sites. There was a lot of other activity on low-income co-ops and condos, giving people a piece of the rock, having the opportunity to affordably purchase a home, get rental income from second and third apartments, was extremely valuable in making people feel secure, that development was not a threat, that in fact it was going to improve their savings, improve their lives, and they would have a piece of it. They would share in the prosperity and the redevelopment of their neighborhood. That's been missing from programs in the last decade. And I think we have to reintroduce the concept of home ownership. And I think that communities have to be at the table up front with the real estate developers and the builders and the government agencies on thinking through how to make sure that development is not scary, that it's not seen as increasing prices for everybody else. And this was a fear about Amazon as well, and about Industry City, that somehow it was going to result in creating jobs that local residents weren't qualified for or wouldn't get. We've got to answer those questions, and that's going to be an important job for the next mayor.
By the way, since we have so many questions about the mayorship, just to brush up, I was looking at some numbers yesterday. So far, it seems that the former presidential candidate, Andrew Young, is ahead in the polls. Everything can change, but that's how it looks like, just for folks that haven't seen these numbers.
Well, that was a poll that was taken in January, right after a survey that was taken of 800 voters in January, right after he announced. And I would point out it was taken of prime voters, who are those 16% of the registered voters who turn out for local primaries. I suspect that this year we're going to see more people voting. For one thing, people are really concerned about the future of the city. So I think that that's going to bring people out. We also have early voting, where for 2 weeks before the June 22nd primary, for the previous 2 weeks, including the weekends, you'll be able to vote. We'll probably also still have absentee ballots because of the COVID. So I believe, just as we did in the presidential election in November, I think we're going to see an increase in voter turnout. And I don't think you can judge at this point who the voters are going to respond to. When the survey, even that same survey, when they asked what are people looking for, not just name recognition of which candidate they know their name, but what are they really looking for? Many of them said good managers who know how to run government. So I think that's going to be, I wouldn't believe anything you read until we get further along into the election cycle. We've got a few months left, and I think a lot of new people are going to come to the polls.
Absolutely. Speaking of new people and good managers, how about Kathryn Wylde for mayor?
Not a chance.
Okay, the next question is, there has historically been some tension between the city and state on public policy issues. Where do we stand on unifying the city and the state, among other actors, around the plan for NYC to rebound and heal?
I would say we're not in a very good position with that regard. I was asked yesterday by a reporter about what's most important among the mayoral candidates, and I said he's got to get along with the governor. And that would be my advice. The tension between the mayor and the governor is not a good thing. And the fact is, under the New York State Constitution, the state government, both the governor and the legislature, have all the cards. They're the ones that have to approve just about everything the city does. The city has significant control over land use decisions, but not over taxation, not over most other major issues. So the mayor, it's hard because New York City is the economic engine of New York State. We're the source of most of the state's taxes. So a mayor naturally feels in New York City, I'm supporting this whole state. I should have a big say in what's going on, but the state constitution does not give them that ability.
Understand. Okay, thank you. There is a question going back to affordable housing and home ownership that you were discussing before. How do you promote home ownership today when real estate taxes are so high in New York City?
Well, real estate taxes are not high for 1 to 3 family homes, condos, and co-ops. They're high for utilities, they're high for commercial purposes, and they're high on rental regulated housing where 30% of your rent. But for home ownership, they're actually not that high. So it's certainly, they don't compare to Long Island, Westchester, or New Jersey real estate taxes. So we have a system that, for better or worse, basically subsidizes home ownership, a tax system in the real estate industry that subsidizes home ownership. So might as well take advantage of it.
Terrific. You mentioned that tech will be the driver for NYC's future. In your view, what are some specific initiatives needed to attract more tech companies, tech workers, and entrepreneurs? How do we retain the tech workers and entrepreneurs who are in New York City and are considering going somewhere else because they can't afford to, they can work remotely?
Well, I would say that, as I said, as I indicated earlier, I think number one, tech talent is global. And so national immigration policy is critical to our ability to continue to be a growing tech center. So that's number one. And I think we can feel confident. Senator Schumer was the senator who introduced a bill a few years ago that said when somebody graduates from a master's or an advanced degree program in the United States, when you have a foreign graduate of an advanced degree program in STEM in the United States, we should stamp a green card to their diploma. So he's an advocate for what we think is absolutely necessary to attract global talent. But in addition, the tech sector, I think, as we said before, the reduced values in commercial real estate are going to make it more possible for those companies to grow here, which is a positive thing, and will ultimately pay off for the real estate industry. And I think that we have to keep supporting the work of our great universities, who are the centers of innovation research. We have worked for the last couple of years with the de Blasio administration and the Cuomo administration on launching a life science cluster in New York City and state. And we have seen venture capital investment in life sciences quadruple. We've seen a huge number of growth companies. We've seen big investments, even during the COVID this year, big investments in building wet lab facilities, development of wet lab facilities. So life sciences, we have demonstrated there that New York can create a whole new high-tech industry that we had not had previously.
Okay, great. We have a couple minutes left, 5 minutes exactly. So I want to conclude on one last question before getting the microphone back to Katie. That will be my question. We've seen Mayor de Blasio and the Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo meet a few times and discuss many things. I don't know what exactly, but I can guess. In the context specifically here of the French American Foundation, do you feel that there are pages of the playbook that New York can borrow from Paris? And since you know Paris, that Paris can borrow from New York?
Well, I think the quality of life approach, obviously the environment, including the environmental approach, resiliency that Paris has led on, are very important examples that we can definitely learn from. In terms of New York, I think that the fact that we are the most productive workforce in the world by most definitions in terms of our professional workforce, legal, accounting, financial firms from all over the world. Global firms send their new recruits to New York to learn a great work ethic, business ethic approach to getting stuff done. So I think maybe that's something that, I don't want to say anything, but France could learn from New York.
Absolutely. Okay, very good. Well, I think that's it for our time, if I'm correct.
That's right. I just wanted to thank you both so much, Kathryn and Remy, for being with us today, for sharing the challenges facing development in New York, and also where we can build bridges and build prosperity for the city. I wanted to note for the people on the call our upcoming events. So for the young leaders on the call, we're having a Young Leaders Cafe next Thursday afternoon featuring young leaders in the law in France and the United States to compare and contrast our legal systems and some legal issues. And our next public webinar will be on February 24th on the topic of media polarization. Thank you again, Kathryn and Remy. This has been a great discussion, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks.
You both.